They are particularly useful for a production bird for both meat and egg. The eggs are like a third of the size of a chicken egg.
Mhm.
They are super nutrient packed though. And for me, I found out that I have a chicken egg allergy. Did a lot
Mm.
of blood work and all these different tests. And I couldn't eat chicken eggs. And so the quail egg, I had no issues with. They didn't flare up any of my health issues. And they were just a huge blessing.
This is the Homesteading for Beginners podcast, and I'm Mona Weathers, your host. If you desire to start and maintain a healthy homestead that aligns with your goals for self-sufficiency in a way that is sustainable and profitable, then you are in the right place. Be sure to like and subscribe the YouTube channel or follow on your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss an episode. In 2020, when the world was shutting down, it was our first year here on this homestead in Georgia. I was starting to feel very lonely because all of my homesteading friends were back in California. And that's when I found that a new startup app called Clubhouse. This is an audio app. Because I was in a new state and a new home, far away from all my homesteading friends, it became a very difficult time for me because I didn't have community. And I talk a lot about community on this podcast. This social app had all of these people talking about things I like to talk about. I like to talk about all the homesteading things like gardening and raising livestock and fermenting food and all that. And I found people who also like to talk about it. I found my community. I found my online homesteading community. And I still have good relationships with a lot of those people that I met in 2020. And my guest today is Jasmine Bass, who I met on Clubhouse. And she is one of those people that this is the first time for us seeing each other like face to face or virtually face to face. But
Yeah.
we feel like we know each other because of all of those hours that we spent talking on Clubhouse. And while we haven't been very active on Clubhouse anymore, we don't have, regular rooms anymore. I have fond memories of all of the hours that we spent talking and getting to know each other and helping other people.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited actually for my listeners to meet you because they need to know the awesome person you are, the knowledgeable person you are. So hello, Jasmine. I'm really excited that you're here.
I'm excited too. And I have the same fond memories. And it was definitely a God thing with our whole connection with that
Mhm.
app. I have some solid friendships from that, including with you.
Mm.
I'm so excited to be here and
Mm.
not only supporting what you're doing, which I think is incredible, but also meeting some of your audience. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into a topic that I've been talking about getting quail for a while now. So you know that I've been talking about getting quail for a while.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very close. I have to get everything put together, like the quail enclosure and all that. But that's
Right.
what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this subject because there's a lot of people who are listening to this podcast who are either, so I have my audience is homestead dreamers and new homesteaders.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are in the stage where they haven't even really started yet and they're just thinking about it. I'm
Right.
trying to give people options based on a small scale homestead situation, which could include just your suburban backyard, and then large scale homesteading options as well. This part, we're talking more on the small scale.
Yeah.
But and I know quail happened to be like a really, really good first start and for small scale. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm excited to get in that conversation. But first, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you,
Sure.
where you are homesteading, and how you got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I homestead in Southwest Missouri. We've been homesteading for about 10 years. I used to use that word loosely because I really felt like I wasn't qualified with my garden and bees to say I was homesteading. But I really feel like that's a mindset. If you're doing things towards learning skills for self-sufficiency and growing your own food, taking care of the land, no matter how big or small you have, that part of homesteading. So we've been doing that for 10 years. I started off with learning how to do natural medicine, and that kind of thrusted me into having my own garden, starting to look into what I was putting into my soil, which led me to connecting with other homesteaders and getting like chicken manure and rabbit manure. We've been doing the homestead thing consistently on this homestead for 5 years. We started off with bees, got our chickens and all the fowl, and had a lot of losses, which brought us to some of the other animals that we could work with on our homestead. And now we have a blossoming homestead that sometimes is a little overwhelming with just 2 people. But we've got, goats and bees and rabbits and turkeys and geese and all the things. Chickens and quail are some of my absolute favorites to have on the homestead, and I can't imagine not ever having them because of their simplicity, the space that they don't need, which is amazing, and how easy I can keep them protected. And because we do a lot of stuff on our homestead for food preservation, but that's a little bit about us. We have lots of pets and stay connected in our community as much as possible. So that's me in our homestead.
That's awesome. So I know about all the poultry you have. I remember when you got the geese and the turkeys and that sort of thing. What made you go into quail? My desire to get into quail has to do with what you mentioned, like a meat source, the small space, that sort of thing. But like, who introduced you to the idea and why did you decide to go that way?
So it was a complete fluke. And Mona knows me well enough to know that I get animals before I'm prepared. And I'm a fly by the seat of my pants homesteader. So actually, in conversations on this social media app that we're talking about, the social audio app, Clubhouse, Larry Wheeler, who has a homestead, he actually relocated to over here in Missouri and works here.
He's actually going to be on the podcast as well. I have him
invited. So he at the time had a very small urban homestead space in Virginia and kept hearing this sound in the background of his conversation. I was like, Larry, what noise? And he's like, oh, those are my quail. I was like, oh, quail. So in a couple conversations and listening to other people who also had Coternic quail, I was like, that sounds like something fun. But I didn't pursue it until I did a swap. I had somebody on a Facebook marketplace, homesteader swap group, say, hey, I'm looking for turkey poults, turkey eggs. I was like, I have turkey poults. I have turkey eggs. What do you want? And she said something about having Coternic's quail eggs. So we did a swap and the rest is history. I went in deep, deep, deep. And so now we're at the point where I have an online course about quail keeping and I have a pretty thriving, the quail pay for a lot of the animals that I have on my homestead now. So it really wasn't a well thought out plan, but I am so glad that I took a chance on them. And now that I understand the benefits, I can't believe I never heard about them before.
Yeah. Yeah. So share some of those benefits. The quail in the background.
Yes.
Is it loud too? It was his kids or the quail? Like you could hear.
And I loved it. And that's one of those things I was like, oh, I could do this. They sound kind of like songbirds. So the type of quail that I'm talking about are domestic Japanese quail. They're also called Coternic, which is a tongue twister to say if you're not used to saying it. And so they're a little bit different than the native birds in the United States, where we have like valley quail, California quail, bobwhite quail. Those are completely different species. Those are called New World quail. These are Old World quail that were imported from Japan in the late 1800s, early 1900s to the Americas. And they are particularly useful for a production bird for both meat and egg. The eggs are like a third of the size of a chicken egg. They are super nutrient packed though. And for me, I found out that I have a chicken egg allergy. I did a lot of blood work and all these different tests. And I couldn't eat chicken eggs. And so the quail egg, I had no issues with. They didn't flare up any of my health issues. And they were just a huge blessing for me to be able to cook with. So if you get laying chicken, the hens of these quail lay consistently every single day, about 300 to 320 eggs a year, which is
wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Okay. Yeah, so to me, they're considered production animals.
Right.
And they start laying as early as 6 weeks old. usually about 8 weeks old, which is also incredible because that time for being a chick
Right.
to laying egg is so short compared to, 4 to 6 months with chicken.
Right. That's where I'm at. Like, I need to
Yeah.
add more. I need to add more birds because we went from 17 to we
You have lots of mouths to feed.
right now more mouths to feed and all that. And I'm like, okay, I either have to wait 4 to 6 months is usually,
Yeah,
6 months is usually, unless you get the leghorns.
right.
6 months is usually the amount of time. I have to
Mhm.
wait and do all of the transferring, or I can
Right.
wait 2 months.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the cool thing about quail is they, unlike chickens, they do not like to free range. So
Mhm.
captivity is where they shine, which is a huge benefit for me because we were dealing with a lot of losses with our chickens due to free ranging or like even
Mhm.
just having fencing around them. We were having predators come in and kill our animals, our birds. And so with quail, they do best in confinement because they don't have that same homing device at dusk to go into a hiding
Mhm.
spot and like rest for the night.
Mhm.
They are like they go all day long. They never stop moving. So having a space where it's either on the ground with a full aviary around them or stacked hutches for them is ideal for these birds, which makes them perfect for small spaces and even
Mhm.
apartments. People have had them in their apartments in small stacked cages where they have like a good amount of space, but the confinement is where these birds shine, which I really can appreciate, especially when you
Mhm.
don't have ways to protect your animal. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, there's so many good things about, well, we will get to the cons because I talk
Yes,
about the
there
pros, and I want to
yes.
hear the cons because I want people to understand what could happen on the negative
Absolutely,
side if you get them. So, but
absolutely.
you mentioned breeds, so
Mhm.
is the Coturnix, like, I've heard of the jumbo, whatever.
Yeah.
What are the
So
like which
there are lots of color variations when it comes to
Mhm.
Coturnix. So there is no breed like we have breeds of chicken, and
Mhm.
that can change the egg color or the meat taste or whatever the case is, and the plumage. With Coturnix, it's just Coturnix. They all have the same um, meat and egg production, but there is a size
Mhm.
variance, which is jumbo or standard. So these
Okay.
are small birds, right? So the
Mm.
standard birds are usually around 8 to 10 ounces as an adult bird, which isn't
Okay.
huge, but the
Mhm.
jumbos can go anywhere from 10, they average about 14 ounces, which is almost a pound, which is a very big
Mhm.
bird for the type of quail that they are. So my
Mhm.
jumbos that I keep, I like them around 14 ounces, and that gives me about an 8 to 10 ounce carcass to, cook.
Okay.
But the plumage, there are several dozen varieties of plumage, and that makes them very
Mhm.
fun because you can
Mhm.
have all fun colored birds. You're not stuck to just the wild type, which is the pharaoh, which most people, when you look at a picture of Coturnic quail, you see a brown bird with a rusty chest and like the gold stripes down the back. And
Mhm.
that native from their original color, that's the wild type. But there's so many fun plumages to
Okay. I didn't realize they were the same, bird. I thought they
yeah.
were all different. I thought it was like chickens. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah,
there are wild ones like California quail and stuff that are different breeds, right?
absolutely. Yep.
But I didn't realize what I was looking at was just different variations of Coturnix.
Yep.
I didn't realize that. I love
Most
learning
people
new
don't
things.
realize, but it's so fun. It's so
Yeah.
fun, and that allows you, like, you can have them, I have breeder sets that I will sell to the new homesteaders, and if they want a
Mhm.
variety, it's wonderful because they are the same species, the same breed, and the color variation doesn't matter what you're breeding together, you can have all these fun colors and plumage.
Okay. And the egg colors are,
Yeah.
I know that they vary a lot too. Does that have anything to
Sure.
do with the color of the bird itself?
No, it does
Mhm.
not. So
Okay.
there are, for those that are looking on a video, there are these beautiful brown speckled eggs,
Mhm.
and they are the standard egg for quail. They all have different speckling patterns on a tan or off-white green egg, and those beautiful. But then there is a blue, which is called celadon, and that blue egg has it's somewhat like if you get into goats and there's polled goats have no horns, you have to have two copies from parents
Right.
to create a baby with these blue egg laying, but there's no outward marker for these. So if you want blue eggs, you have to talk to a Quaternic breeder who has what's called celadon layers, and they'll be able to set you up with homozygous celadon genes. But
Okay.
that's here nor there.
Right.
But the eggs taste the same. So between the different colors, it does not matter. Like, a wild type can lay blue eggs or brown eggs, vice versa. You just have to have the gene. So the eggs taste
Okay.
the same. The birds are all the same. They just have a special gene on them. Yep.
Okay. And the jumbos, do they lay the larger eggs? Is that the idea as well?
They do lay larger eggs as well. And I find that the jumbos are slightly lower on the production levels. So they're going to be more in the mid 200 eggs per year compared to standard. And I also find when it comes to reproductive side that the males need a few less hens because they are a lot larger and they have a harder time mounting the hen to be able to fertilize the egg. So
Okay.
they're great. A lot of people love them. And I have some, but I like my standard best for production for eggs.
Okay. Do you use the ones for eggs as well for meat? Like, is the standard Quaternics your favorite bird all around for eggs and meat?
Yes, just because of how quickly I can get them produced. So, what I have is two separate aviaries because there isn't demand for jumbos. I find that the standards, they eat a little bit less food per day, and the weight difference as a processed bird for meat is only an ounce or two because I have slightly larger standards. So for me, I would rather have the fun colors and the egg production for my meat source as well over having less egg production and only a couple ounces more in meat and a lot more food consumed to make those birds a lot bigger. So,
Okay, I see. Okay, so let's get into housing. I know there's usually people either do the hutches or they do the aviaries, right? So why would you choose one or the other? Just
yeah.
base reasons?
So the base reasons would be space. So space, you have the aviary has to be on the ground, and you want to have a large enough space where they can fly. So they have to be at least 6 foot tall, and they need to be long enough that they can glide down. So quail will pop up and flush when they're spooked or they're just rowdy, and they're given enough space they can jump up high and then glide down. And that's where the aviaries are fun for people who want to have a more natural setting or are used to having chickens free ranging. It kind of gives you that satisfaction that you've got birds on the ground, they can scratch, they can hide, and you can create that more natural setting. It is not the most convenient setting because you'll have to look for the egg like an Easter egg hunt every single day because they'll hide them all over the place. And you'll have a lot more maintenance as far as, dealing with the poop. You'll have to stir it in and have deep litter. So there's a lot of things to consider when you go to an aviary. Now, I love mine, but there's a little bit more effort on a daily maintenance that has to be done. And when you do hutches, that you can do hutches or stacked cages. So hutch, the difference between a hutch and a cage is that you have one side that's solid and completely covered. So kind of like a little cabin with a front porch, like screened in front porch is what I think of them as. And those are the best for outdoor settings. So if you don't have a barn and you just need to have animals outside in your backyard without being in a building, A hutch is going to be perfect because it gives them protection from the elements, but it also gives them fresh air and sunshine on the other side. Hutches are usually only like 12 inches tall, which is important because those birds won't flush and hurt themselves in something that has short ceiling. So you don't want to use like a really large or tall rabbit hutch for quail because if it's 2 foot tall, they can flush up and either break their wings or neck. So you want to modify something with a very low ceiling for hutches. And that goes the same with cages. So cages are great for people who have a barn or a shed, or maybe they just want them on their like green-in porch. They typically have larger wire holes around the edge, which makes them less predator proof. And they do have a fun feature of light slant on the floor where the eggs roll out. So the maintenance is really easy because you don't have to fuss with the birds. You can have everything mated. And it's just like, here comes the eggs every day.
Yeah.
It's pretty self-maintaining. So there's several ways that you can keep quail. I've even seen people do tractors where they move every day. And of course, there's always different things to consider, but the most popular styles are either going to be the cages, the hutches, or the apiary.
Okay. Yeah, when you shared with me before that it needs to be a certain, not too tall if you have a cage or a hutch. I just hadn't even thought of that, but that makes complete sense that, they like to fly and they can help themselves.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about this feed because I recently read, I was in one of those quail groups and I saw somebody mention something about their quail eat more than their chickens. Is that something that you found to be true?
So I have not found that to be true, but I will say that if you don't have the right style of feeders, they are wasteful. So quail tend to like to stick their beaks in the feed and just rumble around until they decide on the perfect piece of food. So a couple of ways you can reduce waste with quail is having a low waste feeder. So I take those plastic shoe boxes that you can get from like the, Rubbermaid shoe boxes for your shoes. And I will drill holes in them that are about 1.25 inches wide. So they actually put their heads all the way in, and any of that fussing and mussing that they do in there stays inside the lidded container. You use a normal chicken feeder, and I have some in my aviary. I swear they make it thin and just fling everywhere. So that is where you'll see a lot more of that cost go to waste because they can be a little bit wild. So, taking a little bit of time to do that. The other option is fermenting their feed because anytime ferment food for any animal, even my goats included, that is a lot more attractive to them. And because it's a little bit more moist, it sticks together. You don't have the dust and the crumbles flying out everywhere. But I have found that cost-wise, my birds maybe eat 2 cents a day. Okay. In feed costs, whereas my chickens were eating about 5 to 10 cents a day in feed costs. So the older they are,
and how right. I was just going to say, how many quail do you have versus chickens? Like, how does...
Am I allowed to say that in public or no? I have too many. I usually maintain about 100 to 150 quail at a time. And then sometimes I have more than that because I am putting them out for rotation for meat production. But because I have customers that are needing either chick or egg, it's easiest for me to keep a higher number. And I also, something that people don't realize is when quail are chick, they need to have a higher protein feed. So a game bird feed or turkey starter, those are what they need to start off with for their first 6 weeks of life. That feed is typically a lot more expensive than like a chicken layer feed. But once
Mhm.
they have reached adult size, they actually can be transitioned to the less expensive feed because they're no longer needing that high protein to meet up with their
Mhm.
demand for how fast they're growing. So I
Right.
switch mine to a less expensive layer feed, and that also makes a big difference in costs going into maintaining these birds. So some people like
Right.
to leave them on a game bird adult feed, but I don't feel that it's necessary because there is no muscle growth or feather growth after 8 weeks, 10 weeks old. So that's a
Okay.
cost thing to think about. And in our Quail University, Quail 101, we actually have uh, downloadable calculators to figure out how many
Mm.
birds you have, how much your feed cost is, how much they'll eat. And they'll give you a full rundown with just two little inputs of
Right.
what you're gonna expect to spend on these little.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
That is
so
awesome. I love tools like that.
oh, man,
Um,
just that alone, it saves so much, questions, yeah.
right. Before we move on from feed, I want to ask about supplemental
Sure.
things like even scraps, like you know how
Mhm.
we feed chickens or scraps. Are there things like that you can do as well?
So they are not as good of scroungers as chickens
Mhm.
are, but they do enjoy, any of your vegetable or leafy green scraps. They love those. Something that I found that they don't do well with is any of your grain scraps and any of your, like, meat scraps that you could give chickens. Just don't
Mhm.
do much with those. And I actually love to, um it might be gross to some people if you're not used to this, but I will allow black soldier fly larvae to
Mhm.
have a specific part of our compost. And those larvae, as they come out, go straight to the quail, and they are really high protein, but they're also 30% calcium. That's
Mm.
actually usable for them. So it's great to add to your quail layers. It's basically like free food, not for the
Mhm.
squeamish, can barely do it. So
Mhm.
but then like something like sweet potato slips, I will grow sweet potato slips all summer long and
Mhm.
just cut them off and give them to the
Mhm.
quail as well. So any of your leafy greens and weeds and things like that, they absolutely love those. You just want to
Okay.
stay with same things that you wouldn't give your chickens as far as plants go, like
Mhm.
the greens from tomatoes and potatoes. You don't want to give them those greens.
Mhm.
But oh, they'll tear up any weeds that you give them or any plants that
Okay.
you plant in there. They will destroy them. They love it.
Okay.
Yep,
That's good.
definitely supplement.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I wonder if they would eat the kudzu. The chickens like kudzu.
But they will.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, okay. So let's go. We talked about a lot of the pros of having them.
Yes.
Let's talk about the cons. I need to I think I've asked you this question before, but in case anybody has this same scenario, same question. When I had Checker, so you know I had Checker at one point, and
Yes.
I was going to breed those for meat as well, meat and
Yeah.
eggs. And
Over.
yeah, beautiful birds, but they're vicious to each
Yeah.
other. Do you have any of that happening? So I would raise them from eggs, and they would
Mhm.
be raised together. And the males, I believe there were the males that were killing other males.
Okay.
So I ended up with one male and three female is what ended up happening. I had no other males, so I'm assuming the oldest male or the strongest one was just killing off the other one.
Yeah.
Does that happen in quail as well?
So quail are a lot less territorial than chukar.
Okay.
And a lot of the behavior issues with quail, if you run into them, have to do with a handful of things. So, generally speaking, you can raise quail in a colony setting, which means you can have multiple sets of breeders. So, the ratio that's ideal for eliminating that type of aggression is 5 hens to one rooster. And you can multiply that as long as you keep the ratios the same. So, um, if you had 25 hens, you could add 5 roosters to that. You have 30 birds. And there's also square footage thing that needs to be considered with paternic. So you don't want to have too much space because I have found when you give them too much space, they will become super territorial and you will have some of that behavior that you found with the sucker. So it might feel they're a little bit confined, but 3 birds per square foot of space is ideal because they work together as a full family instead of saying, this is my space, you can't be here. Any more crowded is way too crowded and you won't have good ventilation. You'll have health issues. Too few, you will absolutely have a territory issue. Now in the aviary, I actually give them an immense amount of space. So they'll have a whole 2 foot to themselves per bird, 2 square feet per bird. And again, in a colony setting, I really don't see any of those behavior issues. Sometimes the males will be very tenacious breeders, and I try to pick ones that are the calmest. So if you have a male that tends to chase his hens or mount them aggressively or pull any of their feathers off the back of their head, I sort them with one that's a little calmer. But overall, the aggression that you may see is very limited to inadequate space, inadequate ratio of males to females, or not leaving food down 24/7. They do get a scarcity possession aggression. So they need to have food available 24/7 to eliminate that aggressive behavior trying to hoard food.
Okay. So, do you have any other cons then? I mean, I don't know if you consider that a con,
Well,
or
I do.
not.
For somebody that's brand new, it can
Mhm.
be very overwhelming if you don't have that information. So I think it's something that can be a con for a newbie if they're not aware of the ratios and the spacing and all of that. Um, they are not as noisy as chickens, which makes them great for being in a backyard setting, in a neighborhood setting. However, the roosters, they sound beautiful. I love them. If during the peak of fertility production, which is going to be like summer hours, we have the longest daylight hours. They love to sing all day, all night. So if you are very sensitive to this, it almost like they say like weeka wee or Cobra Kai or something like that. Wild sound, blah, 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 like they just. But the males will call out at all hours of the day and night, and so you just have to be very sensitive to that if you have neighbors that are a little bit sensitive to that. I don't find it annoying at all. It's 10 times quieter than chickens. The hens make a sound that sounds a little bit like spring peeper frogs. It's just like a chirp or a cricket sound. It's a very soft and beautiful sound. So if you don't need them for meat production, I would say go without the roosters if you're just needing egg production, and then find somebody that can raise new ones for you when you need them. A con that I would say is one of the bigger ones for me anyway is the amount of poop that they produce. So in an aviary setting, it's not so bad. In a cage setting, you have to be willing to change those trays out every few days, or allow the poop to fall through the grate to the ground and be compost. In an indoor setting, that smell can be a little bit overwhelming, or even in a barn setting. So it's a workaround is that you can line it, you can throw it away, you can put wood shavings in a tray, like a poop tray, catchment tray, and the shavings will absorb the moisture, which that's where that odor comes from in the first place. And then those trays can just be dumped into a compost. But I know that's kind of a luxury, having a space to just pile up compost. So some people won't have that luxury. So just kind of something to think about. It's not a true con, but if you are not somebody that likes to handle waste regularly, you may reconsider these poop machines because they produce a lot of it.
Yeah.
Oh man. So I think really my con list for quail is so small compared to the benefits of having them. I really can't think of a whole bunch of negatives for them, to be completely honest. The chicks, if you're raising chicks, there's a little bit of a learning curve because they are so tiny. They're really hardy. They grow so fast. I really can't think of a whole lot of cons.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. That's good to hear. And if anybody is considering it, having a small cons list is good. So,
Yes, it's for
uh,
sure.
so you mentioned your course, and I
Mhm.
want you to talk a little bit about that because I know people are going to want to find out more about that.
Yeah. So, um, I partnered with two of my wonderful friends who are also quail keepers, and this came about because there aren't very many good books or like online resources for raising quail for beginners. I mean, there's a lot of very complicated, complex topics about them, but not just the basics. And there's, of course, lots of YouTube videos and there's all these things. So, what we wanted to do is pull together two different styles of keeping quail and breaking it down to everything a newbie would need to know. There are 10 chapters, there's like almost 8 video hours all the way, like, you don't have to know anything. We start from, like, the history of where they came from, all the pros and cons list. We talk about raising chicks, raising adults, um, how much it costs to feed them, how to incubate them, troubleshooting, raising them, housing options, all the things. I even have a video on how to butcher them for those that have never butchered quail before. So we've got everything there for you, and then you have the community to back it up. Um, so it's quailuniversity.com, and our first course there is Quail 101. And we're really, really excited about how well it turned out. It's like blood, sweat, and tears learning technology to make this work for the communities. And it's something that once you've gotten the course, you can have it forever. And there's no like subscriptions or anything. It's very inexpensive. We wanted to put it in the hands of everybody that would like to have it. So $49 for
Well,
all patterns. I know,
that is really cheap.
I know. But the other thing we wanted to do is make sure that we were pouring back into our communities.
Yeah.
So some of the proceeds go to an event called QuailCon, where all of this teaching, it's just teaching and fellowship community, and that happens in Ohio at my Shire Farm. And then we also have a program with our farm partner, My Shire Farm, for like basically a scholarship for kids that are 18 and under. So we really wanted to make sure that we provided ways for kids to get connected with doing something like raising their own meat and egg, have that responsibility. So we have all these wonderful partners that help us with that. But a lot of the proceeds that we've set aside for donating goes to that. So
Okay.
it's a big project of love because I
Yeah.
really don't think that enough people realize that they could still do homesteading in a small scale, any kind of animal. So just getting that out there and teaching them how to be successful and reach their goals, that was our thoughts behind it. So
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I love that. I love
yeah.
how this community serving the
Yeah.
community and that's wonderful. Well, I'm sure we have convinced a few people, at least listening to this, that they should get quail or at least start at least take the course to
Yes.
learn more about it. And I'm very close. I'm actually working on looking at some designs for a hutch.
Awesome.
So if you have any resources for that too.
I'm gonna tell you, my favorite hutch that I have found, and I actually got to see it in person, is from my friend Chris Carnes from Slightly Redneck on YouTube.
Okay.
So his design is very simple and it's very doable. It's an actual hutch. And I love the one feature that I love the most is that the solid side is a literal sandbox. So the
Okay.
mess is so easy to get through because you can take a kitty litter scoop and get out any of the waste so you don't have wasted sand and soiled
Nice.
sand. But the hens love to lay their eggs in there. So you always have clean, beautiful eggs instead of like poopy eggs and things like
Yeah.
that. And I know where you're at in Georgia, it doesn't get nearly as cold as some of the other states do, but the hutch style allows even birds in sub-zero temperatures to live well. And when it's really, really
Okay.
hot temperatures, they have good ventilation. So that's my favorite hutch style. If you look up
Okay.
Slightly Redneck on YouTube, he's got a
Okay.
whole list. Chris Carnes is a great guy. I absolutely love him.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, I'll look that up.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of covered a good amount.
Yeah,
today.
definitely.
And where can people find you, like on social media and stuff? Where can they
Yeah,
find you?
so I am brand new to YouTube, but I do have a YouTube channel. It is Time and Timber Homestead, and thyme is like the herb. And you can also find me there on Instagram at Time and Timber Homestead. And then if you're specifically looking quail, I do have a Facebook group called Self Sufficient Quail. And that is specifically for people who are wanting to homestead and use raising quail as part of their self sufficiency journey. And I have an incredible community there, super helpful people that uh, are excited to see you succeed raising quail. So if you're specifically looking for that, that would be the place to go.
Yeah, that group grew really fast. I
Oh my
remember
goodness.
seeing it like when you first started it, and I was like, wow, how many
Yeah.
people are in there now?
We've got about 6,000 members.
Wow, yeah,
Mhm.
it grew really fast. That's
It
awesome.
did.
Okay, well, thank you for coming and explaining the quail, and I'm really excited about getting mine, so I'll be sure to tell you all about it.
Yeah. I will be excited for you. I know you've been thinking about it for a while, and honestly, it's kind of addicting. So just be careful. We've got a couple people in our little circle quite addicted to hatching and raising quail. They are fun.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
thank you so much for inviting me to talk about it.
yeah.